It was one of those calm afternoons when everything feels normal. The sun was shining warmly in the sky, and a soft breeze moved through the trees along the quiet suburban road. Brigadier General Alicia Monroe had just left a meeting at the military base. She was dressed in comfortable civilian clothes, jeans, a neat blouse, and a jacket. Her military uniform, full of medals and badges, was hanging neatly in the back seat of her car, hidden under a garment bag. She liked to blend in when she was off duty, after years of leading troops, attending high-level briefings, and working long, stressful days. She appreciated these moments when she could just be herself. Not General Monroe, but simply Alicia. She had one hand lightly resting on the steering wheel, the other tapping gently to the rhythm of a slow jazz tune, playing from the radio. Traffic was light, and the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass. Her mind wandered to her weekend plans. Perhaps she'd cook something new. Maybe call her sister to catch up, or even spend some quiet time reading on the porch. Life had taught her to appreciate these small, peaceful moments. But somewhere in the distance, an unnoticed thread of trouble was weaving its way toward her. She didn't see the police cruiser waiting at the corner of an intersection, hidden behind a large oak tree. She had no reason to think anyone would stop her. Her driving was careful, her record spotless. And she had done nothing wrong. As she turned onto a slightly busier street, the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel caught her attention. In her rearview mirror, she saw the same police cruiser pull out and slowly follow her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Cars often end up behind each other by coincidence. Still, she kept an eye on it. Her years of military service making her naturally alert to changes in her surroundings. A minute later, the flashing red and blue lights burst to life. The sound of the siren, short and sharp, broke through the calm music in her car. For a moment, Alicia's brow furrowed in confusion. She looked at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't even close to the limit. Her seatbelt was fastened, her phone was untouched, and she hadn't driven through any stop signs. She was puzzled, but as a disciplined leader, she knew how to handle unexpected situations. She slowed down, signaled, and pulled over to the side of the road. The cruiser stopped directly behind her, lights still flashing. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to remain calm and polite. Years in the military had taught her that self-control was her greatest strength. Even in tense moments, in the side mirror, she saw two officers get out of the cruiser. Their movements were brisk and heavy-footed, like men in a hurry who already had a story in their heads. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, rested his hand near his holster. The other officer's eyes scanned her car quickly, as if searching for something dangerous. Alicia's pulse quickened slightly. She rolled down her window before they reached her door, hoping to start the conversation on a respectful note. "Good afternoon, officers," she began, her voice steady, but the taller officer didn't return the greeting. "Step out of the car, ma'am," he said, his tone flat but commanding. Alicia blinked, taken aback. "May I ask why, officer?" She replied calmly, careful not to sound confrontational. "Step out now," the shorter officer repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. Something in their voices told her that this was not a routine traffic stop. Her years of service had sharpened her instincts, and right now they were whispering that something was very wrong. Still, she complied. She unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the warm pavement. The moment her feet touched the ground, the taller officer reached behind her and, without warning, snapped cold metal handcuffs around her wrists. The sound of the cuffs locking echoed sharply in the air. The jazz from her car radio still played softly, an odd, almost surreal contrast to the sudden tension. Her mind raced, not in panic, but in analysis, just as it did on the battlefield. Why was this happening? She had no weapons, no suspicious behavior, no reason for such force, Cars began to slow down as drivers passed by, curious about the sight of a well-dressed woman being cuffed on the side of the road. A few pedestrians stopped, watching with frowns and whispering to each other. Alicia could feel the shift. The calm of her day had been ripped apart, replaced by confusion, humiliation, and a rising sense of injustice. She took a slow breath, holding on to her composure. She knew one thing: she would get through this. But these officers had no idea who they had just placed in cuffs, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought formed, not yet a plan, but the beginning of one. The warm pavement beneath Alicia. Monroe's feet seemed to radiate more heat than it should have. The calmness from earlier was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar heaviness in the air. She stood there on the side of the road, the cold handcuffs biting lightly into her wrists, the sharp metallic sound of each movement echoing in her ears. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser reflected against nearby car windows, casting brief strobing shadows over her face. The taller officer moved behind her, his hands still hovering near his weapon as if she were a dangerous criminal. The shorter one circled her slowly, his eyes darting from her shoes to her hair, studying her in a way that made her feel more like an object than a person. Alicia's military training had prepared her for countless high-pressure situations, but this one carried a sting she hadn't felt before, one of personal insult. "Ma'am, you are being detained," the tall officer said in a clipped tone. "For what reason?" Alicia asked, her voice firm yet calm. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't pleading. She was doing what she had always done, seeking clarity, gathering information before acting. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," the shorter officer said, avoiding her eyes. That single sentence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Alicia tilted her head slightly, as if she hadn't heard correctly. A suspect? In what incident? The taller officer didn't answer. Instead, he reached into her jacket pocket without permission, pulling out her wallet and tossing it onto the hood of her car. The shorter one stepped forward and began questioning her about where she had been, where she was going, and why she was driving in this part of town. This part of town. The words struck her with a strange mix of anger and disbelief. She had served her country across oceans, commanded soldiers in dangerous war zones, negotiated military strategies with foreign allies. Here she was, standing in her own country, treated like she didn't belong in a certain neighborhood. A small crowd began to gather. Two teenagers across the street had their phones out, recording every moment. An older man stood near the bus stop, shaking his head with a look of quiet disgust. Someone whispered loudly enough for Alicia to hear, "She's not a criminal." "What are they doing?" The taller officer seemed to notice the eyes on them and barked, "Keep moving." To the bystanders, the people didn't move. This wasn't something they saw every day, a woman who carried herself with such dignity, standing cuffed, calm but unshakably strong. While two officers tried to bend her into the role of a suspect, Alicia knew how fast situations like this could spiral out of control. She'd read the headlines. She'd seen the bodycam footage of similar incidents that had ended much worse. But she also knew something these officers didn't know. They were about to make a mistake that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The shorter officer leaned closer. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" he asked, as if trying to intimidate her. Alicia met his gaze. "Do you?" she replied, her voice quiet but cutting through the noise of passing cars. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, but he quickly masked it. The taller officer opened the back door of the cruiser and motioned for her to get in. Alicia, still calm, walked toward the car without resistance. The metal of the doorframe was hot under the afternoon sun as she ducked her head to step inside from the back seat. She could see her car in the mirror, her uniform's garment bag still hanging neatly inside. She thought about how quickly an ordinary day could twist into something unrecognizable. She thought about the chain of command, about the people in high places who trusted her judgment and valued her service. The officers thought they had control of the situation. But as Alicia sat there, the faint smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth said otherwise. They didn't realize it yet, but the balance of power was about to shift. And when it did, it wouldn't be in their favor. The inside of the police cruiser was hot and stuffy, the faint smell of old vinyl and disinfectant clinging to the air. The seat was hard and narrow, the cuffs forcing Alicia's shoulders into an awkward position. Outside the window, the afternoon sun still painted the street in warm light, but to her, everything now felt colder. Sharper, like the air had shifted from spring to winter in an instant. She watched the two officers through the glass as they stood near her car, speaking in low voices. The taller one gestured toward her vehicle, pointing at the back seat as if there was something suspicious there. The shorter officer glanced at her through the tinted window, his eyes quickly sliding away when they met hers. Alicia knew that look. She had seen it in interrogation rooms overseas, on the faces of people who didn't have proof but had already decided on the story they wanted to tell. It was the look of someone building a case on assumptions instead of facts. After a few minutes, the shorter officer opened the back door. His voice was clipped, the tone carrying a false confidence that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. "Ma'am, you're being detained because you matched the description of a woman involved in an armed robbery earlier today," he said. The words seemed to hang in the air like heavy smoke. Alicia almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the accusation was so far removed from reality that it bordered on absurd. "An armed robbery," she repeated slowly, her calm voice making the officer shift uncomfortably. "Do you have any evidence to suggest that I was involved?" The taller officer leaned in from the other side of the car. "We have reason to believe you were near the scene," he said vaguely, avoiding specifics. Alicia narrowed her eyes slightly. "Near the scene? That's your basis?" she asked. She wasn't shouting, wasn't pleading. She was dissecting. Their words like a surgeon with a scalpel, exposing the weakness in their logic. The officers exchanged a quick glance. One of those silent conversations where neither person wanted to admit they might be wrong. But Alicia could tell they didn't have a clear suspect. They didn't have clear evidence. They only had a description vague enough to fit half the people in the city. And she had become the unfortunate target of their tunnel vision. Her mind flicked to all the cases she'd read about. How quickly these situations could escalate. When officers refused to admit mistakes, she had trained her soldiers to adapt when the facts didn't fit their assumptions. These men, however, seemed determined to bend the facts until they matched their version of the truth. The shorter officer began asking her a series of rapid-fire questions. Where had she been in the last 2 hours? Who had she spoken to? Did she own any firearms? Alicia answered each one with precision, giving just enough detail to be clear, but never losing control of the conversation. Her military discipline kept her voice steady and her words measured, even as she felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. Then, the taller officer made the mistake of overplaying his hand. "Look," he said, "if you cooperate and tell us the truth, maybe this can go easier for you." Alicia tilted her head, meeting his gaze directly. "I am telling you the truth. The question is, are you prepared to hear it?" The officer blinked, taken aback by the confidence in her voice. From outside the car, a woman's voice called out, "She's not your suspect. I saw the news report. The woman you're looking for is shorter, has tattoos, and was wearing a red hoodie. She looks nothing like her." The officers stiffened. The bystander had clearly been watching the scene unfold and had decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. Alicia caught her reflection in the glass. Her posture was still straight, her eyes calm but sharp. The accusation was crumbling, but the officers weren't ready to let go. Not yet. Instead, they doubled down, muttering about needing to confirm identities and standard procedures. But Alicia knew better. This wasn't about procedure anymore, was about pride. They had made a call, and now they were. Afraid to admit it was wrong, inside her mind, something shifted. She wasn't just defending herself now. She was quietly preparing her next move. They thought they had the upper hand, but the truth was, the game had only just begun. The police cruiser's door slammed shut. And Alicia was once again alone in the back seat, the weight of the handcuffs cutting into her skin. The air inside felt thicker now, like every breath had to be pulled through a layer of invisible tension. Outside, the voices of the two officers drifted in low, urgent, but not low enough to hide the frustration in their tones. She leaned her head back against the seat and let her eyes travel over the small details around her. The metal cage separating the back seat from the front. The faint scratch marks on the glass where someone had once pounded in desperation. The radio clipped to the dash, spitting out static and brief bursts of chatter from other patrol cars. She had been in military vehicles designed to withstand gunfire, and yet this ordinary police car, on this quiet street, felt more claustrophobic than any armored truck she'd ever ridden in. Through the tinted glass, she could see the small crowd that had gathered. A handful of people stood on the sidewalk, some with phones raised, others just watching silently, their faces showing a mix of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Among them was the woman who had called out earlier, still standing with her arms crossed, glaring at the officers like she could burn holes in them. Alicia had dealt with moments of injustice before, small, subtle ones that slipped into daily life, but this was different. This was loud, public, heavy-handed. It was the kind of situation that wasn't supposed to happen to someone like her. Someone who had given her life to serving the very country, whose representatives were now treating her like a criminal. Her mind shifted from confusion to clarity in a heartbeat. She realized that this wasn't just about her. The way they were handling her, the way they dismissed her questions, the way they clung to a flimsy description as their justification, this was part of something bigger. She wasn't just standing in the middle of a mistake. She was standing in the middle of a pattern, and patterns, she knew, could be broken if you knew where to strike. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to fight physically. That would only feed whatever picture they wanted to paint of her. No, she was going to do what she did best, control the situation by controlling herself. From her position in the back seat, she began mentally mapping the chain of command. In the military, rank wasn't just a title, it was a network, and hers reached high, very high. She thought of the Pentagon, of the men and women who knew her by name, who had seen her lead under pressure, who understood exactly what she was capable of. She thought of the people who owed her favors, the ones who would answer her call without hesitation. The officers moved back toward her car, their posture stiff. The taller one had his jaw set, his eyes fixed ahead like he was forcing himself to ignore the stares from the sidewalk. The shorter one was speaking into his radio, throwing quick glances toward her every few seconds. Alicia studied them carefully. She could read their body language the way a pilot reads an instrument panel. The tension in their shoulders told her they were aware something wasn't adding up. The way their eyes darted around told her they felt the crowd watching. But most telling of all was the stubborn set of their mouths. It was the look of men who were too deep in to admit they might be wrong. She let the silence stretch as they opened the door. "We're taking you in for questioning," the taller one said, his voice louder than before, as if volume could cover the cracks in his authority. Alicia tilted her head slightly, her calm eyes locking onto his. "You're sure about that?" she asked, her tone slow and deliberate. For a brief second, something flickered across his face, a tiny involuntary pause before he answered. It was enough to confirm what she already suspected. They weren't. Sure, they were bluffing. She leaned back, her mind sharpening. This wasn't just a wrongful detention anymore. This was a power play. And if there was one thing Alicia Monroe had mastered over her decades of service, was the art of flipping a power play back on the one who started it. In that exact moment, she knew what she had to do. The call she would make, the people she would involve, and the ripple effect that would follow. The officers thought they had taken control the second they slapped those cuffs on her wrists. What they didn't realize was that they had just handed her the perfect reason and the perfect stage to take it back. The police cruiser rolled forward, its tires humming against the road. The flashing lights had been turned off now, but the officer's posture remained rigid. Alicia sat in the back seat, her hands still bound, her expression unreadable. To anyone passing by, she might have looked defeated, head slightly tilted, body leaning back in the seat. But the truth was, she was thinking, calculating, preparing. Years of military service had taught her that the most dangerous person on the battlefield was not the one shouting orders or charging forward. It was the one who stayed silent, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Right now, she was that person. The car made a sharp turn into a quieter street, away from the small crowd that had been gathering. The hum of the city faded, replaced by the low, steady chatter of the police radio. The taller officer drove, his eyes fixed on the road, while the shorter one tapped something into the onboard computer. Every now and then, they exchanged quick, hushed words. Alicia caught fragments: detain, possible match, confirm later, but never a complete sentence. She let them talk, let them think they were in control. But in her mind, a very different conversation was playing out, one that involved Pentagon operators, military police, and people whose ranks dwarfed anything these officers could imagine. Her phone was in her purse, which now sat on the front passenger seat. She could see the strap peeking out. All she had to do was wait for the right opening. The call she needed to make wasn't just about clearing her name, was about setting something in motion that would make these two officers wish they had never pulled her over in the first place. The memory of their earlier smirks replayed. In her mind, the dismissive tone when she tried to ask why she was being detained. The way they ignored the bystander who pointed out the real suspect didn't even look like her. They weren't just making a mistake, they were making a statement, intentional or not, about who they thought she was. And now, she would make a statement of her own. The taller officer glanced at her in the mirror. "You're quiet," he said, almost mockingly. "I'm thinking," she replied simply. "What about?" The shorter one asked, his voice carrying a note of sarcasm. "About how quickly situations can change," she said, her gaze steady on the back of his head. "One minute, you think you have the upper hand. The next minute," she let the sentence trail off, her silence speaking louder than any words could. The taller officer chuckled under his breath, but it was forced. She saw his fingers tighten, slightly on the steering wheel. They pulled into the parking lot of a small precinct building, its brick walls worn from years of weather. The lot was mostly empty. The cruiser stopped, and the shorter officer got out first. He opened her door and gestured for her to step out. Her feet touched the ground with slow, deliberate steps. She wasn't resisting, but she wasn't hurrying either. She knew that even the pace of her walk could send a message. "I am not intimidated by you." Inside the precinct, the air was cooler, the faint hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. A desk officer looked up, his eyebrows raising slightly at the sight of her. There was something in his eyes: recognition, maybe even doubt, but he said nothing. They led her to a small holding area, a narrow bench against the wall. She sat. Down, her hands still cuffed, and glanced at her purse, which had been placed on a counter nearby. It was close enough that if she asked for it at the right moment, she could get what she needed. The shorter officer muttered something about paperwork and left the room. The taller one stayed behind, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Alicia's eyes locked on him. "You know," she said quietly, "there's going to be a moment today when you wish you'd handled this differently. That moment is coming sooner than you think." He smirked, clearly trying to hide the flicker of unease that passed through his expression. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes not to rest, but to focus. The timing had to be right. In the military, a mistimed order could cost lives. Here, a mistimed call could cost her the advantage. She would wait until the room was empty, until she had access to her phone. And then she would make the call that would change everything. Every minute felt like a countdown. And she knew exactly what would happen when the clock hit 0. The room had gone quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights above sounded louder now, like a constant electric drum roll marking the seconds. Alicia sat still on the narrow bench, her hands still cuffed. Her eyes half closed, not out of weariness, but to mask the fact that she was watching everything. The taller officer had stepped out to speak with someone in the hallway. His voice, low and hurried. She could only catch fragments, still processing. Confirm identity. Hold until. But the tone told her everything. They still didn't know for sure who she was, and they were stalling. The shorter officer returned, dropped a small stack of papers on the desk, and muttered something about getting this over with. He glanced at her purse on the counter, then at her, and walked into another office. For the first time since this began, she was alone in the holding room. Her eyes opened fully. The moment had arrived. She leaned forward slightly. "Officer." She called toward the doorway, her voice steady but carrying a quiet authority that made people instinctively listen. The taller one reappeared in the doorway. "I need my phone," she said. "You'll get it back after processing," he replied. Crossing his arms, she tilted her head, her gaze holding his. "If you delay this, you will regret it before the hour is over. This is your last chance to make the right decision without someone ordering you to." Something in her tone, calm, direct, unshakable, made him hesitate. He didn't know why, but it felt dangerous to underestimate her. Without another word, he walked to the counter, picked up her purse, and handed it over. Her fingers slipped inside the bag, finding the smooth, familiar shape of her phone. She unlocked it with a swift motion, her hands moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 urgent calls made under pressure. Scrolling past her personal contacts, she found the one she needed: Pentagon Ops Liaison Direct. She pressed the button and held the phone to her ear. The line clicked. "Pentagon Operations Liaison, Major Briggs speaking." "Major, this is Brigadier General Alicia Monroe," she said, her voice carrying the same precision she used when briefing troops. "Before deployment, I am currently detained by local law enforcement under wrongful pretenses. Location, County Precinct, West District. I need military police intervention, immediate verification of my identity, and a record of this incident preserved. Now, there." Was no pause on the other end, only the sound of a chair scraping back, hurried footsteps, and the voice snapping into full action mode. "Understood, General. Stay on the line. We're dispatching MPs and notifying command. You'll have confirmation." Within minutes, the taller officer who had been leaning casually against the wall a moment ago now stood straighter. His eyes darted between her and the phone. He didn't know exactly who she had called, but the sudden steel in her tone and the swiftness of the response told him this wasn't ordinary. The shorter officer walked back into the room mid-call, holding a clipboard, but froze when he caught the tail end of the conversation. "Copy that, General Monroe. Pentagon Command will be contacting your precinct chief directly within the next 5 minutes. Major Briggs said. "Hold your position. This is being escalated." "Thank you, Major," she replied, ending the call with a single tap. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The two officers exchanged a glance, one that wasn't angry or smug now, but unsettled. They didn't ask who she had called. They didn't have to. They knew. Alicia placed her phone gently on her lap and looked at them both. "I suggest you start thinking about how you're going to explain this," she said softly, "because the people you're about to hear from don't take incompetence lightly." The taller officer opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. The shorter one turned and left without a word. She leaned back on the bench again, calm as ever. The countdown was over. The call had been made. And somewhere, miles away, a chain of events was already in motion, one that would come crashing down on these officers like a tidal wave. The minutes after Alicia ended her call stretched out like slow-motion film. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the precinct's air conditioning. The taller officer lingered near the door, pretending to check something on his radio, while the shorter one kept himself busy shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. Neither spoke. Alicia sat with her hands resting calmly on her lap, her phone still within reach, her posture perfectly straight. She looked more like a commander in a strategy room than a detainee in a holding area. Her eyes stayed fixed on the doorway, not because she was waiting, but because she knew exactly what was coming through it. It started with a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. A sharp, urgent ring that cut through the usual background noise of a precinct. Then came the muffled sound of a desk officer answering. A moment later, his voice carried down the hallway, louder, now edged with surprise. "Yes, sir. Yes, she's here." "Yes, I understand. Right away." The taller officer stiffened. The shorter one glanced toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. Then came the second phone call, this one not muffled at all. It rang at the desk just outside the holding room, and the officer who answered it barely spoke before standing up straight, like a soldier called to attention. "Understood, General. Yes, we'll cooperate fully." The taller officer turned his head slowly toward Alicia, his earlier smirk gone. "General," he muttered under his breath, before he could process it. The precinct's front doors swung open with a force that made the hinges protest. Two military police officers in crisp uniforms stepped inside, their boots striking the tiled floor in perfect unison. Their presence was like a sudden shift in gravity. Everything in the room felt heavier, sharper, more disciplined. They didn't pause to look around. They walked straight to the desk, "Sergeant," exchanged a few quick, clipped words, and then headed down the hallway toward the holding area. The taller officer instinctively straightened his posture as they entered, the kind of reflex born from seeing authority greater than your own. The shorter one stepped back, suddenly unsure of where to stand. "Brigadier General Monroe," the lead MP said, addressing Alicia with crisp respect. "We've been sent to escort you and confirm your release immediately. Pentagon Command has ordered full cooperation from local law enforcement." Alicia stood slowly, the clink of her cuffs echoing in the room. The MP turned to the taller officer. "Remove them," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The officer fumbled with the key, his hands not as steady as before. The cuffs came off, leaving faint red marks on Alicia's wrists. She rubbed them lightly, not as a gesture of pain, but as a quiet reminder to herself and to them what had just happened. "You have detained a decorated U.S. Army general without cause." The MP continued, his voice as sharp as a blade. "This incident has been reported up the chain. You can expect formal inquiries and disciplinary action." The taller officer opened his mouth to explain, but the MP cut him off. "Save it for the investigation." The shorter officer tried a different tactic. We thought she matched." A suspect's description. The second MP stepped forward. And you acted without evidence, ignored witness statements, and failed to verify her identity. All while treating her with blatant disrespect. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of each word landed like a hammer. From the hallway, Alicia could hear more phones ringing, more hurried footsteps. The entire precinct seemed to have shifted into damage control mode. The MPs escorted her toward the exit, their presence forming a protective barrier between her and the officers who had brought her in. As they passed the desk, the sergeant avoided, her eyes busying himself with paperwork that didn't need attention. Just before reaching the door, Alicia paused and turned slightly toward the two officers still standing near the holding room. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the space like a command issued on a parade ground. Actions have consequences, she said. You're about to learn that in ways you never imagined. Neither officer responded. Their eyes said enough. They already knew this was no longer about a mistaken arrest. This was about careers teetering on the edge of ruin. As she stepped out into the daylight, the warm sun hit her face again. But now, it didn't feel like the same day she'd started. Something had shifted permanently, not just for her, but for the men still standing inside, staring at a future they could feel slipping away with every passing second. Asterisk,